Arizona PBS is proud to support Indian Country Today. For 6 decades, we've provided television programs and now digital content. But we go beyond that, sending outreach teams across Arizona, offering workshops in language and literacy, family engagement and community outreach, and supporting tribal communities with early learning and school readiness resources. Join us at azpbs.org.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tawahungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. A push to unionize workers at a tribal casino in Southern California could have a ripple effect for other tribal casinos. The Voice of San Diego reports workers at the Sequan Band of the Kumeyaay Nation want to form a union, which the tribe opposes. This effort is a major test of the Tribal Labor Relations Ordinance, which was adopted by tribes in state compact negotiations. The ordinance is similar to the state's labor laws and requires the tribe to work with a union once one is selected by employees. The labor union, Unite Here, sued the Sequan tribe in federal court, requesting that it be held to the ordinance. Last December, the court ruled in favor of the labor union. The tribe has appealed, and the case is currently before the Ninth Circuit. The decision will determine whether federal law or tribal law has jurisdiction over labor relations at tribal casinos. Since the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the Pfizer COVID vaccine for kids as young as 12, tribes and urban health clinics are busy vaccinating Native youth. Chickasaw youth are being vaccinated at the Tishmomingo Health Clinic in Ada, Oklahoma. And as Karina Dominguez reports, parents are also taking their kids to get vaccinated at Native Health in Phoenix.
The CDC is now recommending children as young as 12 receive Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. In Phoenix, Native Health started vaccinating kids last Thursday, the same day it was approved by the Indian Health Service. Native Health CEO Walter Murillo says his 12-year-old son was vaccinated that day.
It doesn't hurt too much, and he went to school for the whole day, had no side effects, so it went really well.
Have you sit over here with us for 15 minutes?
Tyron Tooley's mom also took him to get vaccinated last Thursday.
It just felt like a little pinch. That's all.
Minnie Amos is a registered nurse for Native Health, and she's seen firsthand just how eager some parents are to get their kids vaccinated.
Excitement is out there because they want their whole family protected because of grandma or the, the ones who have pre-existing conditions in their families.
Some parents are hesitant to get the vaccine, but Murillo says knowing the research and the technology behind it helps. He says young people can get their regular vaccines and the COVID-19 vaccine.
You don't want anyone to get this because it's very scary.
Native Health is one of many urban Indian health centers providing healthcare and social services to urban natives and non-natives. The clinics have administered 8,000 vaccines so far, with half going to Native Americans. In Phoenix, Karina Dominguez, Indian Country Today.
The 4th of July is just 6 weeks away, and the decision to allow fireworks at Mount Rushmore rests in a court decision. The governor of South Dakota filed a legal challenge, according to the Argus Leader, against the Interior Department. Kristi Noem is asking a federal judge to order the National Park Service to allow the fireworks display. The Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe filed a motion to intervene in the lawsuit, saying the state did not properly consult with tribes, in part because the tribal chairman was not at the consultation meetings. In a statement, the tribe says it will not allow the voice of the people to be silenced by the governor. The tribe argues it should be allowed to take part in the lawsuit because Mount Rushmore is on the sacred Black Hills. U.S. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is also weighing in on the issue. Haaland says the government has explained its public safety and tribal cultural concerns for denying a permit and says it is too late to change course. An Ojibwe scroll from the late 1800s is on its way home. Two St. Paul, Minnesota businessmen noticed the scroll on a website auction. Sean Blanchette reached out and offered to buy it and asked others to help contribute to the purchase. Shawan Canoe, who is Ojibwe and a Harvard professor, told the Brainerd Dispatch, It's really a privilege that's earned over years. We consider them to be living beings, and so to be separated from them is really a very damaging thing. Skinner Auctioneers in Boston said the piece originated from a private auction collection in St. Paul. The auction house estimated its value to be between $15,000 and $25,000. A unanimous vote by the Alaska legislature will protect a cemetery in southeast Alaska. The cemetery holds the remains of Aleut people who died in a World War II-era internment camp. State Representative Sarah Hannon is a Democrat from Juneau. She says House Bill 10 would add 251 acres of state-owned land in Funter Bay to an existing state marine park. To read more about this story, go to our website, IndianCountryToday.com, and search for the headline, Haunted by World War II Internment. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Up next, mascots and games.
How some are still being viewed while some others are changing. Nielsen's latest research findings on Native American cultural appropriation came out last week. The survey was fielded during the March 2021 U.S. edition of the Nielsen Fan Insight Survey. Responses are made up of 1,000 residents weighted for representation across gender, age, race, and sports fandom. The latest research is quite telling about what the public knows about the impact of Native appropriation in sports and why it's harmful to Native people. 51% of fans still feel using Native American mascots is an honor. Today on the show, we have Crystal Echohawk, who is the founder and executive director of IllumiNative, to talk about the true impact of Native mascots on Native people. Good morning, good day.
Hi, Mark, great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start with the basic tenets of the research.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think before we kind of get into, you know, what the research is saying, I really have to, you know, shout out and give a huge, you know, thanks to Nielsen. This is actually a new partnership that IllumiNative has been building with Nielsen over, you know, since the late 2020. And, you know, Nielsen is, you know, as so many people know, really is just quite, you know, an extensive, you know, organization that's able to survey on a range of topics, right? And a really, oftentimes really look to a trusted source for these types of polls and information. And so we've been really thankful to be able to, you know, forge this partnership where we were able to really work with them to insert these questions into a broader sports survey. That they did, because we really wanted to look at, you know, where was the American public at after so much happened last year with the Washington football team, with the Cleveland baseball team. This was a helpful insight into taking some stock about where we are in 2021 after these changes. And clearly, you know, there's still a lot of work to do.
Well, with that work, let's start with the basics of the survey so we can go deeper.
And I think, you know, seeing that, you know, 51% of Americans still think that using Native mascots is an honor. I mean, you know, I was recently talking to Dr. Freiberg about some of these findings and research, and it just really goes to show how deeply, like, embedded, right, sort of this romanticization of Native peoples, and that, you know, oftentimes non-Native peoples kind of still looking at these things is that they're honoring in different things. It's, you know, it's really more about them than us and their identity, right? And that these things make them feel good, right? And they're sort of less concerned about the harm. And I think that was, you know, I think in looking at this, you know, it is troubling, you know, because I think, you know, we have really, and Dr. Freiberg, Suzanne Harjo, you know, Amanda Blackhouse, thousands of Native activists over time, you know, have really been talking about the harm, and particularly the psychological harm that mascots cause to our children. But it just really goes to show that, you know, I think we have a lot of work to do ahead of us to continue to educate the American public that despite sort of their love for these things, to really understand that it is harmful to us, that this does fuel racism and bias against our people. And I think when I look at these numbers, right, it's stunning to, see that, that people think that this is still an honor. But I think that one of the encouraging things that I saw was that more than half the respondents, 53%, want more education on why these mascots are such an issue. And so I think that just goes to show that we've got to keep hammering away. We've got to keep telling the story. We've got to really continuously expose, diverse audiences and sports fans to our point of view and the science and the education about why this is harmful, why this is really fueling racism. And, thank goodness that we have our own media outlets like Indian Country Today, right, that will give us these platforms, but we are largely still erased in national media outlets, other national media outlets, right? And these sports teams are really powerful, and I think have fought kind of tooth and nail to hold on to these things for, primarily economic reasons. So I think it just shows that we have to continue to organize and to continue to educate. But I see that there's an opportunity. The fact that Americans are signaling that they want more education on this issue, I think, is really one of the bright spots. I also think back to our Reclaiming Native Truth research, and when we did polling in 2017, for example, we found that, I think it was, probably over 60% of Americans didn't understand this issue. And I remember as we were moving through that work, our pollsters advised us that you will never move the American public on this issue. They're too dug in. So I actually see movement in these numbers, right? When we look at where we were in 2017 to where we are in 2021, the change is slow, right? But I do see that we are making forward progress, but we still have a lot more work to do.
There's so much there that I want to kind of follow up on, but one is so much of the history of this is bad polling. And your research is really the first that's actually done hard numbers about what the public really sees on some of these issues, including those from tribal communities.
Exactly. And, I think one of the most detrimental things in this whole issue around mascots was the faulty Washington Post poll. That was really done, I believe, in 2016. I remember it happened right before we started Reclaiming Native Truth that supposedly said, that 90% of Native peoples have no issues with mascots, right? And they had a really faulty sample. It was very small. But we worked with, Dr. Stephanie Freiberg and Dr. Ariane Eason, and they led a whole poll themselves that really, I think, is transformative in terms of how we need to be thinking about doing this kind of research and polling in Indian country. And they sampled a size of over 1,100 Native peoples from, a mixture and, diverse geography representing both, rural reservation communities and urban communities. And what they found is actually it was quite the opposite, more than half of Native peoples oppose mascots. And when we really talk to our young people, over 65% are really oppose, Native mascots and really see these things as racist and harmful, right? Our young people are signaling this enough is enough. This type of representation is harmful, in a time when this country is increasingly understanding that things like blackface, right? And these issues of representation are wrong, but yet there's still this fundamental disconnect that red face, right? That these caricatures and representations of Native peoples are wrong. The American public is still struggling with that. But I think I'm so excited when I see our young people really picking up this issue and saying no more and saying things like the tomahawk chop, right? And other things. It's racist, it's wrong. And the majority of Native peoples believe that. And so this is why we have to continue to organize. We have to use all our energies and a variety of different channels to continue to really educate and let people know that the Washington Post and their faulty polling and other things don't speak for us, right? We as Native people, we know our own minds. I mean, we're literally the only population, right, that is used as mascots. I mean, and it is so dehumanizing and objectifying. And I think, we knew when we started Reclaiming Native Truth and we went in and we did all the research about what do Americans think about us, our level of erasure in American society is incredibly profound. I mean, when you think that nearly 80% of Americans know little to nothing about us, right? And we look at our erasure in media, in education, and so many other important sectors of society, you know, this is going to take us a minute. And this is going to take, you know, this is a generational fight, but we are making progress. I can tell you that, Mark, from the baseline numbers that we saw in 2016, 2018 that we published, we are making progress, but progress is slow. And we have got to do more work to hold these teams accountable, to hold K through 12 schools and colleges accountable about this. And we have to do more education. But I really, truly believe that we are making a lot of progress.
Speaking of progress and changing the narrative with a new one, I'm struck by, and maybe this is more invisible, or at least as invisible as Indian country, is the WNBA. And I'm thinking with the Connecticut team and their new uniforms and the way, first of all, ownership, but also saying there's another way to tell this story.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's incredibly exciting, you know, and, you know, I think, again, we are making changes. You know, there are signs of this kind of change and people really beginning to hear where we're coming from on these issues. And so, you know, again, I think, you know, we can look at this kind of polling, we can look out into the landscape of sports and say, look, we won a major battle with the Washington football team. We won a major battle with the Cleveland baseball team, right? You see these other examples of positive momentum. You know, you see the range of K through 12 schools increasingly, right, that are really beginning to retire those racist mascots. Or we see legislation, you know, in key states across the country where we're starting to see this change happen. And I think that we're really starting to be heard. And I think particularly when I look at our Native young people, but I also, when I look at the Nielsen results and see that there's also this openness and this willingness to hear our side of the story and to really begin to stand with us. We see that in the younger generations of sports fans. And I think increasingly for NBA, WNBA, NFL, you know, across the board, I think that they're going to have to start looking at the numbers, right, and the demographics of who supports these teams and these leagues. And I think increasingly young people in this country are starting to see that the ways of the past, that these types of racist sports mascots, you know, need to be retired and eliminated. And so I just, again, I know we've got a lot more work to do. It's frustrating in moments, you know, when we see that we wish those numbers were better, but I also see a lot of bright spots in the things that are happening out there.
We have only 30 seconds, but what do you hope to have next happen in this regard?
Well, I think too, you know, we want to be able to really begin to continue to address what's happening with the Atlanta Braves, right? We want to continue we're going to be pushing hard on teams like the Kansas City Chiefs and others. And so I think we're really looking at, you know, how do we go out and continue to innovate in terms of how we're reaching out and engaging American audiences and sports fans in education this year.
Thank you, Crystal Echohawk.
Thank you, Mark.
When we come back, Brian Bull is on the Oregon Trail. Before there was Minecraft and Grand Theft Auto, there was the Oregon Trail. Developed in 1971, the text-based computer game teaches school children about the realities of the 19th century pioneer life on the Oregon Trail. In 1985, the game added graphics. Joining us today is Brian Bull, who is an advisor for the video game. Today, Brian is a reporter with KLCC in Eugene, Oregon. Welcome, Brian.
That's my way, Mark. How are you?
Good. So tell us about this new game, or new old game.
Well, it was probably the spring or summer of 1996, and yours truly had not yet gotten firmly established in a broadcast reporting career. And so I was finding lots of odd jobs, usually small short-time stints at stations, radio stations, TV across the Twin Cities, when through my Actors Network, because I do theater on the side, I came across notice that the Learning Company, based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was putting together the Oregon Trail 3rd edition. And there had been a call out for multicultural parts. And so, long story short, I signed up and found myself cast as Chief Joseph the Younger, which was kind of exciting because he's part of my family lineage, our family tree. And so for a series of shoots, I found myself on a small set in Minneapolis doing what was then revolutionary technology at the time, FMV, which is full motion video. And if you ever played the Oregon Trail 3rd edition, it's essentially just where you assume a position, you say your lines, and then you resume back what's called a neutral position. And by today's standards, it's a little stilted and a little odd looking, but back then it was cutting edge.
And the new game, how cutting edge is it?
I've heard some really good things about it. I have not purchased an edition yet, but I've talked to some colleagues and friends who have tried out the game, and it sounds like what they've done since I was a consultant was they've really incorporated more and more of the Native American perspective and viewpoint, because the Oregon Trail in previous editions, the Native perspective is pretty incidental, but this time they've made sure to kind of really incorporate more and more of the Native American viewpoints in it, and to take a fine tooth comb and kind of just sift out some of the finer details that may seem obsolete or incorrect. I will say that when I was involved with the Oregon Trail 3rd edition, I think they did make a very earnest effort to be accurate and respectful. This was a few years right after Dances with Wolves came out. And, you know, that's a different debate in itself, what you think of the movie. But at that time, what Dances with Wolves did is it introduced the Lakota language, the authentic language, and did not reduce its actors to the stereotypical mug and ugg type treatment that Hollywood had been doing for decades. And so I think there was this push, including an educational software, to really be as accurate and respectful as possible. Even then, you know, the Native perspective was still pretty incidental, but the fact that they didn't have me speaking in broken English or, you know, doing war whoops or wearing face paint, you know, I thought was a pretty good move on their part, because they could have gone so south in so many other respects. But the new edition, I'm hearing, is really just made strides in trying to get Native perspectives worked in ways that they've never done before. One example I understand that's really popular with a lot of the consultants they're using now is that the natives that you encounter on the Oregon Trail aren't just shooting bows and arrows. In fact, they're using trade rifles, which is what they would have preferred at that time. If you have a choice between using something that is, you know, airborne projectile that you shoot yourself, or something that's more powerful and effective and accurate, you're probably going to go for that trade rifle.
Well, it's interesting because in the preface to this segment, we actually talked about reality. And if you look back at the 19th century, the stories we get from any Western, including this game, are very different than the reality. You have things like more lawyers than gunfighters. The hostilities involving tribes was much more about trade than it was about hostility in many cases. The trade network was extraordinarily active. And those are not things that make for a good game, but they're really interesting when you look at both.
Yeah. In fact, the popular myth of cowboys and Indians, you know, was mostly just done through annexation of land and pushing Native people off their lands. Gunslingers were very few and rare. You know, there's just been a lot of revisiting of that history through time that shows that it wasn't quite as rough and tumble as Hollywood makes it out to be. One thing I do recall about my experience on the Oregon Trail 3rd edition, which I thought was really good, set well with me, was the fact that they were talking to me and other people involved who were Native about language, you know, and so I was teaching them some of the base languages. Like I told them about how Nez Perce is actually Nimipu. That's how we refer to ourselves as we people. Phrases, you know, Tatsmewe, which is good day, a salutation you give early in the day. Speaking of the coyote legend, Itziaya. And so they were very receptive to that. And I think that's kind of just kind of the cusp of what we've seen, higher awareness and just a better sense of authenticity that I think is going to just bode well for this version and for future editions of Oregon Trail 3 or future versions of Oregon Trail, because it does remain a very popular series. And I think that generations are going to be learning more and more about this exploration and this chapter of our history for quite some time.
I haven't played this edition, but I have played the previous ones. And I do like the things where some of the mundane gets into the game. It'll be interesting to see how that carries through, like how much flour do you buy and those sorts of decisions that you have to make.
And if things get too slow, someone will just die of dysentery. Always livens it up.
It certainly does. We have about 20 seconds left. What else are you working on, Brian?
Right now, I am starting to look into some of the preparations that tribes will be doing ahead of the wildfire season. It looks like it's going to be another hot, potentially disastrous season ahead. So I will keep you folks updated.
Brian Bull, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. Join us again tomorrow and online at IndianCountryToday.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run. This is Indian Country Today.